Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Monday or Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out over on my YouTube channel every Friday. So today we're cooking through a Japanese curry recipe that I had come up with a couple of months back, which is loosely inspired by a curry that you can find here in the Bay Area in San Francisco from a spot called Bazaar Cafe, which is sort of like a local legendary spot where you can get, like, in my opinion, one of the best curries in town. So we're going to take a shot at reproducing that curry today, which I like to do with a little bit of white miso paste, or at least that's what the original recipe calls for. I'm going to deviate from that a little bit because I forgot to get miso paste, and what we're going to be using today is actually a Korean paste that is very, very similar, miso paste, called doenjang, which is this stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about what the difference is. To me, it's basically just dark miso, which is pretty much the same thing. I think the main difference being that it comes from a different culture. So, but we'll talk about all of those things today and more. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least entertaining to watch. As always, the recipes for things that we're cooking, they already live in a recipe form over on my YouTube channel, so if you haven't yet, definitely check out that channel. Lots of fun stuff coming up. Those recipes, they're out every Friday. So last Friday we came out with a recipe for a lapjang carbonara, which was kicking off a new series dedicated to Asian fusion foods, which was super fun and interesting and really challenging to make. This Friday coming up, we're going to be coming out with a xianbing, which is a Chinese like a Chinese meat pie, which is also one of the most delicious things that I have ever made. So we'll take a look at that and more. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely make your way over to the YouTube channel. Check out what's coming out over there. Those new recipes are coming out every Friday. So we're also working our way up to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Cool, so as with many stir fries, I'm starting things off here by crushing, mincing. This is 4 cloves of garlic. You might notice that I'm not really doing a mince. Actually, what I'm actually doing is just giving it a really, really good crush. So I'm smacking the crap out of it with the flat side of my knife. And then from there, that's basically just a rough chop. And we more or less have a pretty good fine mince there. And that's because garlic is really delicate. So once you give it a really good crush with the flat of the knife, it pretty much just starts coming apart like so. And you really don't need to do too much. You can go back through and do your fine mince from there if you really want to. But I found that it doesn't make a huge difference. What's more important is that you do give it that really good crush. Otherwise, you won't be able to release the allicin that comes out of that garlic. And then without that allicin, you're going to lose a lot of the flavor that comes from that garlic. So very, very important just to give that stuff a good smack. Next up, this is my ginger, which I noticed part of it was molding, so I just chopped a little bit of it off. But the rest of it, what we're doing here is I'm just giving it a quick peel. This is not a potato peeler, this is literally just a spoon. So we're going over it with the flat side of a spoon here. And that's going to pretty much remove all of the exterior skin. And that works because ginger is very delicate. You don't actually need to do too much to get that first layer of skin off because of how delicate it is. So you don't need a potato peeler, just get a spoon out and that will do the trick. It's also very useful because you don't have to be as careful with how you peel it. You don't really have to worry about chopping or peeling your skin off, which is always a danger when you're working with a potato peeler. Then next up, what I'm doing here, this is my fine mince, which is starting off with like a rough dice. Then what we're going to do is we're going to line it up and run our knife through it. Lots of people ask me how to do fine minces. I don't really think that there's a real trick to fine mincing. I think it's very important to have a sharp knife, but that's pretty much it. After that, it's really just about persistence. And oftentimes, I give up halfway through because I'm feeling lazy. So it depends how much you care about having large chunks of ginger floating around in your curry. You can also, by the way, if you don't like doing these fine minces, grate this stuff. You can put it through a microplane. What we do in the food booths when we do it at volume, where we're doing like 4 pounds of ginger, we throw it into a food processor that will do the same thing too. All of the things, maybe not the most ideal thing if you're chopping up just this amount of ginger, because then you got to go back and clean all of those things, which is annoying. I hate cleaning food processors. So that's our ginger. We're going to set these aside. You will oftentimes, in lots of the recipes, pretty much all of the Wu Can Cook recipes, see these two elements. This is our ginger, this is our garlic. You'll see me referring to those two things as our aromatics, specifically because we're looking for their aromatic qualities, so we're trying to derive all of those aromatic qualities from them. Cool. All right, next up is going to be our starch elements. So today what we're working with are a couple of russet potatoes and some carrots, which in my opinion might be the two most iconic parts of a Japanese curry, are these starch elements. You could forego either, or you could probably forego both. What I like to do is include both of them because I think it gives this nice variety. It's also kind of what makes a Japanese curry so hearty, is the inclusion of all of these starch elements. In addition to the chicken that we're going to be using later as well. You can also use, so today we're going to be using, these are plain old russet potatoes. The main reason that I like to use russet potatoes in this recipe, and like pretty much every recipe that I do that has potatoes in it, it's going to be russet potatoes. That's mostly because it's the potato that I always have on hand, so there's no real particular, I don't get super particular about my potatoes. I think there was one Korean potato recipe that we did where we used some Yukon Golds. What's most important though with your potatoes, whatever kind of potato that you're using, but especially if you're using russets, is you want to store those things in water as you chop, because a russet potato will start oxidizing really quickly. Like will start oxidizing in about maybe 5 minutes, probably even less than that. So you want to be really careful as you're chopping and working, because this is going to be 4 potatoes, so as we're working on them, while we're working, keep them stored in water, because you'll find that as you peel your next potato, while that other potato is sitting around, that thing is going to start oxidizing, and once it starts oxidizing, it's going to turn a weird color. Russets like to turn pink when they're exposed to air, which is never fun. It's not going to change. It's not going to change the way that it tastes too much, but it will be kind of unattractive to look at. So what I like to do, store it in some water while you're chopping. Can I say egwa? I guess I can say egwa. Is my name a play on Yan Can Cook? Yes, it is. So the channel's name is called Wu Can Cook. If you grew up in the 90s, if you're a 90s kid, actually Yan Can Cook is still around too. He's doing stuff on Instagram quite a bit. The channel Wu Can Cook, it's an allusion. It's alluding to, or an homage to, the Yan Can Cook show, a show run by a guy named Martin Yan called Yan Can Cook. His tagline was, Yan Can Cook, so can you. I watched the show a lot. If you grew up in the 90s, it was probably the main thing that was on PBS when you got home. If you're like me, when you get home from school, and if you have basic cable, which is channels 1 through 12, that was the thing that was always on, was Yan Can Cook. So that's what I watched a lot. You need this vegetable peeler, yeah. I think this is just a simple, an OXO potato peeler. What I like to do, I think, like I've done similar peels with other peelers though. It's just about like lining it up correctly. So what I like to do is line it flat, and then you can go around in circles like so, and it's much faster. And I figured that out because I did that volume before, and it's really, really difficult to chop or peel huge amounts of potatoes. So yeah. Have I ever pitched any show concepts to networks or streaming platforms? I have not. I don't even know how or where to start doing that. If somebody wants to help me do that, please let me know. That would be cool. All right, so the tricky thing about potatoes, or russet potatoes in particular, but actually this is true for most potatoes, is that they have these weird shapes because they're tubular. So they have these edges around the corners here, where if we start chopping and we don't pay attention to these corners and we leave those corners on, what's going to happen is that those corners are going to start fry. So what I like to do is go through and pick off these corners, so that when we go through and do our chop, we end up with these nice even pieces of nice even pieces of potato, which is useful because if you have an even piece of potato, then you'll also have an evenly cooked potato too. On the opposite end of that spectrum, if you have an uneven potato, that means that you're also going to have an uneven cook to your potato. So we want to pay attention to that stuff. So I'm going to go through and we're going to pick off all of these little edges, and that's going to help keep our potatoes cooking nice and evenly. Yeah. On the PBS, yeah, cool. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to chop these. So yeah, like I mentioned before, the hardest part, especially with russets, but this is true for most potatoes, is when we're working with these potatoes, is that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to how, because of their weird and awkward shape, if you don't pay attention, and remove those little edges there. Uneven cooks, which is not super fun. So then what I'm doing is I'm pushing them off across the side of the cutting into a bowl of water. So just like we're doing while we were peeling them, I'm holding these in some water to make sure as we chop that these things also don't oxidize, because no kidding, potato will oxidize on you within the span of like a couple of minutes. They might even start oxidizing while I have them out. So it's not the end of the world if they do start oxidizing. What really will just happen is it's going to start turning pink. That's not terrible. You can still eat it. It's not inedible or anything. But it just doesn't look super great. You're left with pink potatoes, and we don't want that. It's more of a problem when we're doing like things like hash browns and stuff, because those hash browns, they're not going to get covered in curry powder like we're about to do, so ours is going to be fine either way, because it's about to just get long cooked in a bunch of curry powder, so everything's going to turn yellow anyway. But if you're doing something like a hash brown or a home fry or something like that, where we're really going to be looking at the color of that potato, you want to be paying attention and being careful not to let those things oxidize, otherwise you're going to have a real bad time. Cool. All right. So that's our potatoes. I think we're just about there. Yeah. So, and the last thing that we want to do with our potatoes before we move on, so I have them in our strainer here. What's tricky about potatoes is that they're covered in starch. That's where the potato starch is coming from. That's also what makes hash browns bind together, is because they're coated in starch. We want to make sure and rinse off that extra starch in this case. Sometimes we do want that starch when we're making things like hash browns. We do want to keep that starch around, because that starch is what's going to keep your pancake or your hash brown bound together, unless you don't want pancake or hash browns that are bound together. That starch is really important in that case. In our particular case right now, we want to make sure that we rinse off that starch, because if you don't, the starch is going to cause the potatoes to stick together again back in when we throw them into our curry. So what I like to do, give those potatoes a little bit of a rinse, and that's basically just going to rinse off all of that excess starch. Then one more time, we're going to refill this bowl with some water. And that's just, again, to make sure that these things don't oxidize on us. And that ought to do it. Alright, last up is our carrots here, which you'll notice I'm working with a bunch of very small carrots today, which is kind of annoying. It's like the bottom of the carrot bag. What I like to do, I like to remove these tip ends, because as they taper off on this end here, they're still technically edible, but it tends to get a little bit more bitter, which I don't. And then we're also going to remove these stems too, because those are obviously kind of gross looking. And what I like to do, so let's start off by peeling these. By removing those tips too, by the way, that makes it a little bit easier to chop or peel too. Because if those tapered ends were still attached, we would have a little bit more trouble doing this part. Cool. So then the last thing that I like to do when I'm working with carrots, especially if I'm going to be chopping them up like we are today, is pay attention to the sizes of these carrots. So like as you, I feel like this is pretty obvious, but because the carrot is tapering off, that means that the top end is going to be a lot larger than the bottom. So this part right here is going to be much larger than this part right here. That poses this problem because that means that we have to chop those side parts differently in order to make sure that we end up with even sizes pieces of carrot. So for our larger bits, I'm going to go ahead and do this chop on a bias, like so. And then as we start moving into those larger parts of the carrot, we can change the way that we chop that bias into smaller pieces, like so. And eventually, as we get into the largest part of the carrot, we can change into no bias, like so. And what that's doing, when it doesn't stick to the knife like that, is it's helping us get these nice even pieces of carrot, so that we don't end up with weird tiny pieces of carrot sitting next to large uneven pieces of carrot. And that's just like we did with those potatoes, is also going to help us make sure that we end up with a nice even cook on the potato. Cool. All right, last up is our chicken today. So I have done this recipe with all different kinds of protein. My favorite thing to do it with is some chicken, but I have done it a lot with a lot of tofu many times. I think the original version of this recipe that I did use tofu. In fact, the most recent recipe that we came out with uses chicken thigh, I think. You could use whatever kind of protein that you have. You could even leave the protein out, and that would be a nice vegetarian version. When I'm using chicken, I tend to use chicken thigh, probably mostly because I have chicken thigh on hand all the time. But I also like that it renders a little bit of extra fat for this recipe. Yeah. So much more importantly, though, what I'm doing, just like we did with our potatoes, I'm paying attention to the size of our chop here. So I'm going for about 1/2-inch pieces. And again, just like we did with the other starch elements, I'm paying attention to the size of our chop so that we end up with nice even pieces of chicken here. Cool. So what we're looking for is about 1/2-inch slices here. Not being super careful, but we are paying attention so that we don't end up with this. So we don't want. We do want to make sure that the knife passes all the way through the chicken. That happens to me a lot with a lot of chicken thigh because it has lots of stringy tendon bits. So we want to make sure as you chop that your knife is going all the way through so that you don't end up with pieces of chicken that are still strung together, which is not fun. Alright, so I'm going to set this aside. We're going to do a really quick marinade. I'm not going to get super complicated with this marinade because I don't think that it needs too much, but what I am going to do is this is going to be 4 tablespoons of soy sauce to start. Then this is 1/2 teaspoon of white pepper. And this, by the way, is sort of like the default marinade that I use on chicken a lot when I don't know what else to add. So if you've been following along, you will have noticed that this is the same marinade that I use in a lot of different recipes. And then the last thing that we're going to add, this is going to be half a teaspoon of cornstarch. This is going to be really useful because we're going to be cooking our chicken in a wok fry, which means that we want to protect that exterior of the chicken because the high heat, the really, really aggressive heat of that wok can overcook it really quickly on the exterior, so you end up with overcooked chicken if you're not careful. So the cornstarch is going to play a nice role in preventing that from happening. Then if you're really committed, this should probably marinate for at least 30 minutes. It's not going to marinate for 30 minutes, but try and let it go for 30 minutes. Probably go for closer to 15 minutes though. All right, let's get this board up. Cool. All right, let's clean up our cotton board. And then the last thing that we're going to assemble here is our sauce base, or our liquid, the liquid elements that are going to go into our curry, which I like to do off heat. I actually don't think it's going to be super beneficial doing it off heat, but I still like to do it anyway because miso paste is very clumpy, so we want to give ourselves an opportunity to break up our miso paste. So we're going to start out first. Here are our liquid elements. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, then 2 tablespoons of mirin? Yeah, 2 tablespoons of mirin. Sorry. Then this lastly is going to be a quarter cup. We're using a quarter cup. A quarter cup or 4 tablespoons of sake. Followed by a single tablespoon of oyster sauce. This is where all of our fishy umami is going to come from. If you can't get your hands on oyster sauce, if you can't locate it, fish sauce also a great substitute. Anything that will give you a form of fishy umami will work nicely here. So if you can't find fish sauce, anchovy also a really great thing to use in place of that. You could use kombe, excuse me. And then lastly, this is going to be, so what this should be is 2 tablespoons of miso paste. What we're using right now is actually doenjang. So this comes from Korean food. The reason that I have doenjang and not miso paste is because while I was looking for miso paste a while back, I was at a Korean store and it was the closest thing that I could find in a pinch. So they're both very similar. We were talking about this earlier. But the way that I look at it, the main differences are that doenjang comes from Korean food, miso paste comes from Japanese food, but they're both derived from similar qualities. I wouldn't necessarily say that you should always use them interchangeably, but in our case right now, it's probably going to be just fine. What's most important though, you'll notice, so our miso paste, as the name implies, it's a paste, which means that we want to make sure that we go through and break up those large clumps, because if we're not careful, if we just leave it the way that it is, those large clumps are going to go into our wok fry, and then we're going to have large clumps of miso paste or doenjang floating around, and that's not going to come apart in our wok fry. So we want to be careful here and make sure that we break up those clumps as best as possible. So I'm using a fork. You could also use a whisk. That would work too. When we do this to scale and some of the food pop-ups, we use a food processor. Sometimes we use an immersion blender, which works really well too. What's really important though is we're just trying to break up all of those big clumps. Cool. All right, last up here is going to be half of a white onion. You could use a sweet white onion. Today I'm using a sweet white onion. You could also use half of a yellow onion. What's more important though is we want to pay attention to timing with this onion. So we're gonna add this really late. This is gonna go in like within the last like 10 minutes of our cook time. That's going to be really, really important because an onion, unlike all of the other things that we just finished chopping, is really, really delicate. So if we throw this in too early, it's going to release all of its water, and then you're going to end up with no onion. It's basically just going to shed all of its water into your wok fry, and then it's going to just disappear. It will literally disappear because an onion is mostly water. So if you throw it in too early, you can lose the whole thing and it will just disappear, which is not what we're after. But what we are going to do is we're going to go through and do our large dice. So what I'm doing here is I left this root end on. This is very important when we do dices on onions. So I left that root end on, and you'll notice that things are starting to split, which is our goal here. But what's happening is that root end, it's keeping the onion together as we chop. So I can go back through and do our dice here, and things don't really start falling apart on us, which would happen if we didn't have that root. And then what we can do is go through and chop around that root, like so. Then we have this nice even dice, and that root, the root end is basically holding the thing together as we chop. Cool, so that's our onion. I'm gonna set this aside. I'm chopping. The last two things that we haven't done anything with, but we're just going to set them aside, is this is a little bit of curry powder and with a little bit of turmeric, which we're going to set aside. We're going to add this to our wok fry later on. So if you're really committed, you could start assembling curry powders from scratch. I did for a little while, but it got to be too much work, so I stopped doing it. If you don't want to do that work, just pay attention when you buy the curry powder. Give it a smell and pay attention to what it smells like. If you want, you might even try tasting it. Curry powders are a spice blend, as you might guess, that depending on what's in that spice blend, it can vary really dramatically what that spice blend actually tastes like. So the curry powder that I'm using, it's not too spicy, but I have used many curry powder spice blends that are overly spicy, and that can get really distracting. Cool, so I'm going to get my wok heated up, and we're going to start cooking here. All right. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So the Friday coming up, as in tomorrow, we're coming up with a xianbing, which is a Chinese like a Chinese stuffed pancake. So it's what I think of it. The way I think of it is it's basically a pot sticker that's been flattened, so it looks like a pancake, and then it's stuffed just like a pot sticker is, and then fried. So it's pan fried. And it's one of those things that you see on the dim sum carts a lot, and you might not know what it actually is because it's kind of like a mystery pancake. So we're going to take a shot at that, and we're going to run through all of those fun things in the recipe coming up tomorrow. So if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet and you're watching on Reddit, definitely hop over to the YouTube and check out what's going on over there. Those recipes are out every Friday. So we got new stuff coming every Friday. So next Friday. What are we doing next Friday? Oh, shumai. We're doing shumai Friday after that. And then we're going to come out with the... Friday after that is going to be our fried rice burrito, which is going to be really fun. Cool. So yeah, if you're interested in stuff like that, make your way over to the YouTube. Check out what's going on over there. Way up to 5,000 subs by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscribe, please hop over and subscribe. Only if you're interested. Don't subscribe if you're not interested. All right. So over on our wok, I should run through this. So the way that we're gonna approach our cook here is we're gonna separate it into two elements. So the first element is gonna look like a pretty standard wok fry, where we're gonna bloom our aromatics, then we're gonna flash cook our chicken and get this nice crispy piece of chicken going. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a bunch of liquid elements to it, including as well as our starch elements, so our potatoes and our carrots. And then we're going to go and do our long cooks. We're basically going to turn our wok into a long, like a stock pot, and do our long cook from there. So that's going to be really important because it's going to dramatically change how we use the wok. So what we're basically doing right now is kind of running through all of the different ways that you can use wok. It's not just for flash cooking. You can also stew stuff in it too. Cool. So first up is going to be just 4 tablespoons of peanut oil. If you don't have peanut oil, if you're allergic to peanuts, you can also just use vegetable oil or grapeseed oil, canola oil. Any of those will work fine as long as it's has a high smoke point. So I like grapeseed. I like grapeseed when I'm not using peanut oil, but anything with a high smoke point will work. Then what we're going to do here, so we're going to start by searing our chicken, which is not absolutely necessary, but I find that it's it helps give the chicken a nice bit of texture if you take the time to do it. What that does mean, though, is we want to add the chicken. We don't want to just drop the chicken in because it will start stacking itself on top of itself. So what we don't want is to start see chicken on top of other pieces of chicken, because what that means when that starts happening is that whatever's sitting on top, it's going to start steaming, which we don't want. In order to make sure that we avoid that from happening, I'm adding this chicken. This is 1 piece at a time. If you're cooking in small batches like we are right now, it's not going to be the end of the world. It might take you an extra like 30 seconds or so. What I also like to do, as best as I can, I don't always pay super close attention to this. But when I'm searing stuff, I like to make sure that as I put the chicken, just face of the chicken, part that has the most surface area, facing down. So that's very useful as we sear, because it's going to help us make sure that we searing process as possible. So it's standing awkwardly, or if it's sitting awkwardly in the wok, then we're going to end up with an awkward sear, and just like weird parts of the chicken will end up searing, which is not ideal. So that's our chicken. We're going to give this wok a little bit of a rotation, and then we're going to let this sear for 2 minutes. So just like any time that we sear something in a round bottom wok, you will have seen me talk about this all the time. This is true with really anything that we're searing in a round bottom wok. Is you'll notice that all of the cooking oil, it's going to pool up right here. And that also includes all of the chicken fat as it starts rendering. So what I like to do while we're searing is I like to make sure and give this wok a little bit of a rotation here, like so. What that's doing is just making sure that that cooking oil, it just starts spreading around a little bit. So if we're not careful and we don't rotate this oil, what's going to happen is these pieces that are sitting on this exterior of the wok right here, those are going to just start burning. So that oil, it's going to be really, really important. If you want it to sear properly, it has to be cooking in that oil. If it's not cooking in oil, it's just going to start burning, which is not ideal. So with the round bottom wok, we want to make sure we give this a nice rotation. Can I debone a chicken as fast as Yan can cook? I can't do anything as fast as Yan can cook. I wish I could. Yan can cook is so good with a cleaver. My part about Yan can cook, or Martin Yan, is that he is so fast with a cleaver, but just has the goofiest shit-eating grin on his face and when he does it, which I love. Alright, so every once in a while I'm going to turn back around and rotate that wok every 15 seconds or so during our sear. We have another 20 seconds left on our sear here. I'm just making its rounds around the chicken. If we're not careful, it will absolutely start burning the chicken. Cool. He was a badass. He is a badass. He's still a badass. Martin Yan's still kicking around. He just came out with the General Tso's chicken line, I saw. I don't think his show's still around, but... No. A little bit of wok hay. Not absolutely necessary. If you're scared of fire, you don't have to try and do that. But basically, if you're trying to go for wok hay, what I'm doing is, so our wok, it's filled with oil, chicken fat. That chicken fat, as we downward, it can ignite with the fire, like so. So what we're trying to do is light that chicken fat on fire. When that lights on fire, you get nice smoky qualities from it. I think it's super optional. You don't absolutely have to try for it. It's definitely an advanced technique. But if you can manage it, that's a nice bit of flavor. And we call that wok hay. Next up, I'm following this up with my aromatics. This is my garlic and my ginger. I'm shifting my chicken to one side here. It's not done cooking, but that's totally okay. The chicken absolutely does not have to finish cooking here. We're going to add a whole bunch more slow cook time here, so we'll have plenty of time to cook. Really, all we're trying to do is make sure that we can pick up a little bit of color and a little bit of searing on that chicken. So really, we're just going for texture right now. So once our aromatics are nice and aromatic, as the name implies, I'm going to do the same thing one more time. We're shifting everything to one. Then we're going to do the exact same thing, but with our dry. First is going to be our curry powder. Curry powder. A little bit of turmeric. This is maybe a teaspoon of turmeric. Turmeric, it's pretty optional. Curry powder is filled with turmeric already. That's what makes the curry powder yellow. But I always like to add a little bit extra because it kind of just like pushes things over the top, especially, and it kind of depends on like what the spice blend is of your curry powder too. Then what I'm doing here is I'm adding that curry powder to the hot oil of the wok right here. That also is in chicken fat too. And what that's doing is it's allowing that curry powder to be great. We're sort of like blooming out those aromatic qualities in that hot oil, which is nice. Alright, so finally, now that we have everything in the wok and nice and smoky, we're going to start adding our liquid ingredients here. So we have all of this chicken fat and all of this fond developing on the sides of our wok. So we don't want that to go to waste, so I'm going to add, this is about a 1/4 cup of chicken stock, and what we're going to do is start deglazing all of this stuff. We want to then next up is going to be our sauce base. For those tuning in late, this is a combination of that soy sauce, sake, mirin, and oyster sauce with a little bit of miso paste, which is a combination of things that we assembled before we started wok frying. Then finally, last up are our starchy vegetables. So that's my carrots going in. And finally, my potatoes. Alright, so last up, what I like to do, this should be about 2 cups of water. I usually just like to eyeball it at this point. We don't have to be super specific with the amount of water that we're looking for. What I like to do is just go for the long cook, and then what we're going to do is turn our stove down. Well, the first thing that I like to do is add a wok ring, especially if you're using a round bottom wok. It's going to help keep this wok stable. And then we're adding, that's about 2 cups of water. And then as we long cook, if it starts evaporating, we can start replacing that water and keep making sure that that water stays at a nice level. So if it starts evaporating too quickly, we can start replacing. Usually I like to start with about 2 cups. Yeah. So, oh yeah, you didn't know he was still kicking around? Yeah, so if you don't follow Martin Yan, he has a pretty active Instagram page. I don't think it's him posting on Instagram. I think it's somebody managing his Instagram. But I follow him on Instagram, and he has lots of fun things that he's posting there, which is mostly like stuff that he's doing. I know that he just came out with a line of frozen Costco, which I think is super old school. It's like the most classic thing that you can do for a Martin Yan. Cool. Yeah, thank you. Cool, so that's our wok fry. We're going to let this long cook go for about as long as we want. I think the minimum amount of time for this long cook is about, it's got a minimum time of maybe 5 to 7 minutes. It can go for as long as you really want to, though. You could let it stew for, I've let this thing stew for like 2-3 hours, and it will taste really good if you let it go for super long. I have not tried to do this curry for that amount of time in a while, but the longer that you let it go, the more flavor will start developing. Lots of times I will just pull it off after about 10 minutes or so. Really what we're paying attention to at this point is the texture and like consistency of our hard veggies, or our hard roots. Root veggies, which is our potatoes and our carrots. So mainly what we're looking for is we want to make sure that those two things cook through. And by the way, the last thing that we have not yet added to our wok fry is our onions, which are still here. We're intentionally going to hold those two back, or those onions back, because if we were to add those onions right now, while we're trying to cook off all of that moisture, and also while we're trying to cook up those potatoes so that they're nice and tender, if we added those onions right now, what would happen is they would just cook off all of the liquid that's inside of the onion, and then they would literally just evaporate. So an onion, because it's so delicate, if you add it to a long cook too early, it will literally disappear, and that's a real bummer. So what I like to do with an onion like this, in this case, I like to small dice it. So that's the first thing that we did, is we chopped it really small. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add it really, really late. So it's going to go in within the last like 5 minutes of our cook time or so. And that's going to help keep our onions nice and crispy and crunchy, so that they still have some amount of presence in our wok fry, or our long cook in this case. But they're not necessarily raw. So and also because they're chopped so small, they blend into the whole curry really well. Yeah. You watched him as a kid in the 80s. Oh, wow. I didn't know Martiniere was kicking around in the 80s. I definitely watched Martiniere do stuff in the 90s. In like 93, 94 or so. That's probably when I was watching PBS the most. I didn't know he was around in the 80s. Martiniere has been around for a long time. He's the man. Cool. I'm just back here. I also mentioned this earlier as well. That chicken, it did not finish cooking through. It was definitely still a little bit pink on the inside. That's totally fine if you're wok frying and then following up with a long cook like this, because it's going to have all of this time in this long cook to finish cooking. So we're not looking for a finished piece of chicken here. In fact, if you finish cooking it, it might end up overcooking, because you've got this nice long cook here. So what I like to do is give it like 70 to 80% cooked through. Mainly what we're looking for is the seared quality to the chicken before we start that long cook, just so that you could even start that chicken in raw and it would cook through in the long cook. So remember to account for the amount of time that long cook is going to contribute to cooking your chicken. Cool. All right, so while that's going, the last thing that I'm going to assemble here, this is going to be a quick cornstarch slurry, which I always forget to do. What's this? So a cornstarch slurry, as the name implies, is a slurry of cornstarch. Literally, what we're going to do is we're going to take, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. And then we're going to dissolve that cornstarch in a little bit of water. So the quantity of water, not nearly as important as the quantity of cornstarch. And what we're going to do is we're going to add this to our wok fry at the very, very end. So right after we add those onions, basically. And this is going to help develop a nice thick and like creamy sauce. So as we start long cooking this curry, you'll notice that it's still quite liquidy. So there's all of this liquidities to it. In the way that we're looking for in a curry. That's totally fine. We're not ready for that yet, because what's going to happen at the very, very end of our cook, we're going to add this cornstarch, and the starch that we're adding is going to start developing it into a nice thick sauce. So I like to think of it, cornstarch slurry is very, very similar to the way that you use pasta water. So we actually did this on Tuesday when we did our lapchang carbonara. We actually reserved a whole bunch the same way that you would do any other carbonara. We reserved a whole bunch of pasta water, and that pasta water, it's filled with starch. And then we reserve that pasta water and we add it to our egg slurry. And what happens when we add it to the egg slurry is that the starch from that pasta water is going to combine with the egg slurry, and it's basically how you turn that carbonara into a nice creamy sauce. So without it, you basically just end up with scrambled eggs. So in a lot of Asian cooking, especially Chinese cooking, but also Japanese cooking too, probably true for most curries, we do a very, very similar thing, but instead of with pasta water, we do it with cornstarch. Frugal gourmet, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know about that. Yeah. Cool. So I'm just gonna keep going through. So we're gonna pretty regularly come back to that curry. We're basically just tossing things and making sure, because that wok, it spreads out very nicely. What's happening is at the very bottom of that wok, something is touching the bottom surface of the wok. So what we want to do is we want to regularly come back to that wok and just sort of like agitate things, because whatever is touching that bottom of the wok, if we don't keep coming back, it's eventually going to start burning. So we want to make sure that nothing is sticking down there. So basically what we're doing every time that we come back, is picking up that stuff, whatever it is that's touching the surface, and just giving it a little bit of an agitation, and that's going to keep things from burning, basically. Also, if you want to let it long cook for a really long time and you don't want to have to keep coming back, just add a little bit more water, and that will kind of just like hold that long cook for a little bit longer. And then when you're ready to start serving, basically just turn that fire up and evaporate the rest of that water. So, cool. Yeah. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. I'll introduce myself while this thing is cooking. We're here. My name is Wesley, and this is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning into one of these streams, we're here live every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST, with new recipes coming out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came out with a lapchang carbonara, which is basically a Italian pasta carbonara, which has removed the guanciale that traditionally goes in carbonara, and we replaced it with a Chinese sausage called lapchang. That was part of a new series that we just kicked off. That was actually the first thing in that series that we just added, where we've been introducing lots of interesting Asian fusion ideas, and basically like taking things that come from really traditional Chinese cooking, in this case lapchang and a little bit of laogan ma, which is some spicy chili crisp oil, and then introducing them to places that they don't belong. So that was the first one that we just finished doing. That was on Friday, and we cooked it live last Tuesday, or a couple days ago on Tuesday. Let's cook and do this. And then we live on Tuesday, so lots of fun stuff like that coming up over on the YouTube channel soon. The next one in that series coming up is going to be a fried rice burrito, which is part of the menu that we have at the food pop-up. Which, if you're here in the Bay Area, we're going to be back at the Alameda Antiques Fair this weekend too. So that one's from the menu item. We also have coming up. There's going to be a miso salmon taco, which is going to be really tasty, and then I forget what else is off part of that series now. There's a whole bunch of stuff. What else is coming up? This Friday coming up, as in tomorrow, we have a xianbing, which is a nice Chinese meat pie. Friday after that, we're going to be doing shumai, which is a nice dim sum dumpling. Lots of stuff like that coming up every Friday. So if you're interested in stuff like that, hop over to the YouTube, check out what's going on over there. In addition to all of the recipe videos, that's also where this second live stream is going. So if you want to know what we're going to be cooking next, that live stream behind me, it has a whole schedule of everything that we're going to be cooking on live stream. I think it goes out by like 3 weeks now. So lots of people, if you were watching over on YouTube, or if you've been following on YouTube, knew a long time ago that we would be cooking this today. Cool. Alright, so back over on the stove here, we're about, this might need another like 5 minutes or so. If you really want to, you could just keep adding water and let it go as long as you want. And as long as you keep adding water, that long cook will just continue forever. So the longer that you cook it, the more those flavors are going to develop and sort of infuse, and you'll get these nice independent flavors, because basically what's happening is all of those qualities that are cooked into your curry, they're starting to infuse into the things that are in the curry. Sort of similar to the way that a marinade works. So those potatoes will get this nice independent quality. All of those things, they happen in long cooks. So the longer that you cook it, the better it's going to taste. I oftentimes will get really impatient and just pull it off the stove, especially if I'm live streaming. I'm not going to let this cook for a whole hour, because I don't want to be here for a whole hour. Totally to your discretion. If you're really, really hungry, you can absolutely stop at this point. Really what we're looking at here is we're paying attention to these potatoes and these carrots here. We want to make sure that these two items, they cook all the way through, so we have nice tender potatoes and nice tender carrots. If we pull it too early, then they're going to still be wrong. We don't want crunchy carrots here. Yeah. Cool, yeah. So we're going to let this go probably another maybe another 2 minutes or so. And then we're going to add our onions in and then sort of start cooking down those onions. So the very last thing, by the way, that we have not yet added, these are our onions here. Holding these off for as long as we possibly can because of how delicate those onions are. So in a long cook like this, if you add those onions too early, what's going to happen is they're basically going to start giving up all of their water. And as they release that water, that's basically the only thing that an onion is composed of, is that water. So as they start releasing, what you'll end up with is basically nothing. It will literally just dissolve into the curry, and then you won't have anything. You might have some fragrance of onion, but you definitely won't have any crispy onions in your curry, which we don't want. Cool. Yeah. These onions, we're basically aiming for about dropping them in at about maybe 5 minutes of cook time remaining, which I think we're just about there. I'm gonna add, that was a little bit of extra chicken stock because I want to give this cook time a little bit longer. Yeah. Cool. The music, yeah, I can't actually hear what music is playing underneath it right now. Because I actually I don't have an active feed of it. There should be a few different lo-fi covers, though. I think the one that recently I had to pull was the Ed Sheeran cover because it kept getting flagged for copyright, so I had to pull it off. Or maybe it's still there. Maybe The Shape of You might still be on the YouTube. Yeah, The Shape of You cover might still be on Reddit, but I had to pull it off of YouTube because it kept getting flagged. That kind of stuff. So finally, at this point, we're really just watching those onions. The potatoes and carrots, they should be cooked. Let's check them. Yeah, those are right there. Definitely could use a little bit more flavor development. Probably needs to add a little bit of salt there. But those potatoes, I think they're almost cooked through. So really what we're looking for is we're paying attention to these onions. We want to make sure that these are giving up a little bit of crispiness. Right now we basically have raw onion. And finally, you will also notice, so the last thing that we're going to add here, well, two of the last things that we're going to add here. The first thing is going to be our cornstarch slurry, which is going to thicken things up. But also, most importantly, the last thing that we're going to add is our salt. So the only thing that we have not added here is our seasoning. So we're not adding any kind of salt at this point. And this is going to generally be true for anything that you're long cooking. You want to hold off on adding salt or seasoning with salt. Because if you add it too early, what's going to happen is as that curry reduces, it's going to become more and more salty. So the more salt that you add and the more that it reduces, the more that salt is going to have presence. So what we want to do as we season things is we want to wait until the very, very end when it's completely reduced. That's when you want to start adding salt and sort of like seasoning to taste. So I mentioned this earlier when I tasted that potato that it needs a little bit of salt But just because it needs a little bit of salt at that point, we don't want to add that salt quite yet. Because that curry, it's going to continue to reduce probably for another like minute or so. And as it starts reducing, it's going to become more concentrated, and then the things that are already giving us salt, like that soy sauce and the miso paste, all of those things, that salt is going to start becoming more and more present. So we want to wait until the very, very end before we add that salt. Otherwise, you can absolutely over-season the curry and it will get too salty. This is why I ate fox. Earlier. I'm moving stuff to one side here so that we have this nice exposed liquid surface here, and then we're going to add our cornstarch slurry to that liquid. So we want to make sure that that cornstarch, you absolutely start just like cooking the cornstarch, which is not. That as soon as I added that cornstarch liquid in our curry, it's going to start up. We have this nice thick and luxurious curry now, as opposed to the liquidy qualities that were our curry earlier. 我们 you know, on the Chinese restaurant said it is. Oh yeah, so she said her residential stove couldn't provide enough BTUs for her wok. Yeah, so that's definitely, so that comes up quite a bit. We actually talk about that a lot. Usually, so I'm actually going to let this long cook so I can answer this. That's the perfect thing to do. Let those flavors develop. So yeah, that comes up a lot. People ask that a lot. Is that how do you like navigate wok cooking on a home range? So that's generally going to be true unless you have a really, really nice, expensive home range. And I actually have seen some commercial stoves on at homes before. But for like 95% of the home ranges that you'll come across, especially the ones that are not gas ranges, lots of times you'll see like induction tops and stuff. Those ranges, they don't get hot enough to basically to mimic what you need for wok cooking. So lots of times when you're watching wok chefs go, especially in restaurants, you'll see them, they'll have these like really, lots of times you'll see them referred to as jet engine burners because they literally look like jet engines. Those things, they go really, really hot. So the wok burners that we use, we have two of them, the Wokman LLC one that we use. I think it goes up to like 80,000 BTUs. And obviously it burns much, much hotter than, which is probably burning at like 25,000 BTUs or so. That's not the end of the world. So what we usually will end up doing in order to navigate the fact that we don't have those like really, really hot temperatures is you have to start removing stuff in order to keep the wok hot. So you actually, as you're wok cooking, this is probably something that you'll discover the more that you use a wok burner. And this is absolutely the first thing, bad lesson that I learned when I started using a wok burner, is that wok cooking and wok burners, it's not actually all about high BTUs. It's not about how hot it gets. It's more about is how the BTUs that you have distribute around the wok. So a crappy wok burner, and I have a couple of them, shoots straight up, and then you just get, as you heat that wok, what's happening is just that center part where the wok is meeting the burner starts getting really hot, and where it hits the wok will reach like 100,000 BTUs. But the rest of the wok is not getting hot. So these exterior parts of the wok, like right around here, it's not heating up properly. So a good wok burner, what we're looking for is nice heat distribution. So that keeps the wok hot everywhere. If you can get that nice heat distribution, most of the time when I'm cooking on the wok burner, it's only at like 40% burning because we actually don't need that much heat. So what you do in a home cook though, is we're basically, as we cook, we start removing stuff. So you cook your chicken, then you pull it out, then you cook your veggies, then you pull that out, and then you maybe cook your noodles, then you add everything back to the wok, and basically by making sure that that wok is mostly empty for the duration of your cook time, that wok temperature stays nice and hot. So that's not something that you generally would do in a standard wok cook with a wok burner, because you don't have to. You don't have to pull stuff out, because as you start adding stuff, the wok is staying nice and hot for you. In a home range, if you just keep pulling those things out, it basically lets you cook all of those items on nice hot heat before it starts losing temperature. Yeah. Yeah. So the wok, definitely the wok burners that we use, at the pop-ups, they go really, really hot, but I actually don't, when we're cooking using, what I find are a lot more useful is that it has a nice heat distribution, so it keeps the whole wok hot. So lots of times when you're cooking on a home range, this part of the wok, or ring of the wok, this whole portion, it doesn't really get very hot, which means that as you start cooking, you have to make sure and avoid that stuff cooking on that. A lot more useful. It's not about how hot the wok gets, it's actually more about which part of the woks are getting hot and how well that wok burner is doing at distributing heat. Yeah. I'm seasoning with a little bit of salt here. And we're waiting till the very, very end to do this part so that we know that our curry is fully reduced and at the reduction we finished our seasoning. They're going to end up over seasoning. All right. So again, if you want, you can absolutely let this thing keep cooking. You'll notice that I added a little bit of water and we just let it keep cooking while we were talking about wok heats and stuff. You can absolutely do that much indefinitely if you want. You can let this thing cook for 6 hours and it's probably not going to taste substantially better after 6 hours rather than like 2 hours or 1 hour. But if you want, you can absolutely let it go for even longer. For me personally, I usually let it go for about 10-15 minutes, about the duration that we just did. Ooh, that's a real foggy camera lens. And a frozen camera. All right, let's go over to the stove because that's frozen. It's been frozen for 10 minutes? Damn, somebody should have told me. All right, so the last thing that we want to do anytime that we cook in a carbon steel wok, like the one that we're using, this is actually true for basically any time that you're cooking in carbon steel, period. But definitely when I'm cooking in carbon steel woks, like the one we're using, as I like to give it a good rinse while it's hot. So while the wok is hot, everything is going to come out really nice and easily. So I probably should rinse this a little bit better. So while the wok is hot, it has this nice non-stick surface. So we can go through it, give it a quick rinse, and basically what's going to happen is once we're done rinsing, is almost everything will come off. 80-85% comes off. Then I like to go back through, and then basically what we're doing is just wiping down the residual stuff. Most of what's coming off right now is water with a little bit of curry powder, which tends to leave behind a little bit more than other things. That'll do it. Oops, wrong camera. So yeah, do yourself a favor, clean that wok while it's hot. It's going to be a lot easier to clean if you start sitting down and start eating because there's food in front of you. You're going to have a lot more trouble cleaning the wok while it's cold because things will start sticking to it when it's cold. Yeah, by the way, feel free, if you do notice that the camera freezes, feel free to just shout at me and tell me. I will not be offended. Lots of times I just don't notice that it's freezing. Yeah, kind of like a skillet, like cast iron, same thing that we do with cast iron. I find that actually, like when I work with cast iron, it's not as big of a deal if you leave stuff sitting behind. You can sort of like burn it off afterward. It's not as much of an end of the world. What happens in carbon steel specifically, if you leave like liquids or water in carbon steel, is that the carbon steel will start to carbonize, and basically it will essentially start rusting. which is definitely not good, and it can actually start damaging the carbon steel. I guess the same thing will technically start happening with cast iron, but not nearly as quickly. Cast iron will take quite a while before it starts to rust. Also might be because I've been working with cast iron for a lot longer, but definitely carbon steel, it's a finicky one. Yeah, add water to it and then wipe it down, and then you can add. I usually don't add oil to it every time. I like to add oil to it like every third or fourth time. What I found is that if you add oil to it every time, that oil it starts building up, and then it just sort of especially in round bottom woks, is it starts to gather at the bottom, which gets a little bit gross, because basically what that is, if you add too much oil, it's basically going to turn into rancid oil. So what I like to do, probably every third or fourth cook, I'll add a little bit of cooking oil, and that's basically just making sure that things don't oxidize. Very similar to the same thing that you do when we're working with cast iron. Basically the same thing. We're adding a little bit of oil to that cast iron. It's basically just making sure that you call it seasoning a cast iron, which I don't really understand why that's called seasoning. I don't understand how that's seasoning at all, actually. But you call it seasoning a cast iron. Basically, what you're doing is that oil is preventing things from rusting, especially if there's water or residual moisture in the wok or a cast iron. It will start rusting. Same thing is going to be true with carbon steel. If there's residual water left behind, it can absolutely start rusting or carbonizing, all kinds of stuff. But yeah, definitely as of the skillets in woks that I've worked with, carbon steel, it tends to be a little bit more finicky for me. Yeah. Oh, you haven't tried a high carbon wok? Yeah, definitely. If you've never used a carbon steel wok, I definitely recommend it. It's probably my favorite material to use for a wok. Other than, with the only exception being that if you're cooking on an induction top or a coil top range, anything with electric tops, my preference would be a cast iron, which people ask me about all the time. Is how do you wok cook on an electric top range? My best approach to that would be, the problem with cooking on an electric top range is basically that the way that those electric tops and the induction tops, the way that they regulate heat is they heat up to a certain point and then they switch off, and then it has a regulator inside of it that says, oh, the temperature of the heating plate has dropped to a certain point, and then it turns back on so it's heating up to 300 degrees, 400 degrees, or whatever you set the stove, and then as it starts cooling down, it will turn back on, and then it reaches that higher point again. So with most standard frying pans, that's not as big of a deal, because standard frying pans have this heavy bottom to it, which that standard heavy bottom is going to retain heat. So if you shut off the stove range for 5-10 seconds, it's not the end of the world, because that heavy bottom is retaining heat for you. In a carbon steel wok, so we can take a look. This carbon steel wok, as with most woks, actually literally just a piece of carbon steel that's stretched and shaped into a wok. So that's going to be a problem if that induction top starts turning off too much, because basically what's going to happen is, because there's no heavy bottom, that wok is going to start shedding heat really, really quickly. And usually, if you shut off the gas range for an induction or on a wok cook for 5 seconds, it will absolutely start losing heat, and that's how you end up with mushy stir fries. So the way that I have always approached it is a good solid cast iron wok is a really good solution to the fact that those ranges are shutting off so much. Yeah, you got to have gas, but depending on where you are in the world, a lot of times gas ranges are illegal in homes. So if you live anywhere in Oahu, they actually don't allow gas ranges. So literally all homes have electric tops, which is a real bummer. And I think what it is that they're illegal. So that means that you kind of have to just work around it. So yeah, cool. Cool. All right, I think that's it, everyone. Let me know if I missed anything. I know I miss questions all the time when I face in this direction. So if I missed anything, feel free and repeat yourself. I know that I miss stuff all the time. I'll be here doing dishes, so if you have any other questions, feel free and drop them in the chat. Coming up tomorrow, so if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet, coming up tomorrow is going to be a Chinese xianbing, which is like a dim sum item that you find on a lot of dim sum cards. Which the way I think of it is like a Chinese meat pancake, or well, the way that I think of it is actually like a pot sticker that's been flattened and then like turned into a pancake. So we're going to come out with a recipe for that tomorrow. That's coming up tomorrow. Friday after that is going to be a shumai, which is also a dim sum item. And then coming after that, I think we're going to do fried rice burritos after that. So every Friday, new recipes coming out. That new recipe coming out this Friday. So definitely hop over to the YouTube channel, check out what's coming up. Then this coming Tuesday, so we're live streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST. So this Tuesday, next week coming up, we're going to be cooking some pad see ew, which is one of my favorite Thai dishes. We're going to be substituting out the traditional gailan that you come across in most pad see ews and replacing it with an American broccoli, which is my favorite way to do a pad see ew because you don't have to deal. I really don't like gailan, so we're going to do that this coming Tuesday too. So if you haven't yet, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel, check out what's going on, and give it a subscribe if you're interested. We're working our way to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit our subscribe button, please hop up and subscribe. Cool. I think that's it. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, I'll see you soon. Bye.
If you think that you don't know, never mind that you still don't love yourself. No, you can find it from somebody else. No, everybody's got to grow up. Sometimes funny how we shoot the mood. Still, when we fighting, baby. Never mind. Everybody wants to be they still got dreams, but they don't love me like they used to love it. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want it. And yes, I still got dreams, but more like a junkie of my 20s, and it's breaking me down. Want to be, baby, yes, sir.